Welcome to the East Singer Cup. I'm Aysha. So this segment is called When East Meets West. So today we have Mr. Fritz Schmid, who is a UEFA Pro licensed football coach from Switzerland, who was last manager of the New Zealand national football team. So before he spent many years in professional clubs in Europe, amongst other 7 years as assistant manager of FC Basel, where he won various trophies in the league as well as in the Swiss Cup. They actually also qualified for the UEFA Champions League twice. So after working with the National Team of Austria for 2 years, he then moved to Southeast Asia and acted as the technical director at the Football Association of Malaysia in 2017. So since his return from New Zealand, he is now working as a technical consultant for UEFA and FIFA. So I am honored to welcome Mr. Fritz to this segment, and I would just let you take the floor and present to all of you his experience and tips and whatever would be useful for budding coaches.
Thank you very much for this wonderful introduction, Miss Aysha. I appreciate your giving me all the honors. Good afternoon to everybody, to all the students and to the complete audience. It's a real pleasure to be connected back with Singapore. As you have heard, I have spent some considerable time in your neighborhood, in your environment. Obviously quite a few years in Malaysia, but also with short projects, with development projects on football. I've had a lot of opportunities to come to Singapore, so it's of course a pleasure to be connected. Unfortunately online, because I realize Singer Cup this year will be a bit a different event. But still, it's great to be connected. It's great to talk to you, and I hope we will have an interesting hour in front of us. Saying hour, having said hour, I mean that of course all of you will be more than happily invited to share opinions, to raise questions in the following Q&A. And I'll be very interesting to hear about your opinions and your views, to learn about how football in Southeast Asia is moving forward. So let me just quickly move to my screen and show you the first slide of my presentation. Which should appear now on your screen. And if there's no interference from any, organizer or technical or from our host back in the office, Aysha, I shoot with the presentation. Maybe first to give you an idea about my whereabouts, because you have heard, I'm originally from Europe, from Switzerland. And before we move further, I just want to give you a quick idea where this is actually sitting on the world map. I would assume a lot of your colleagues, they are familiar, but just to give you an idea about my background and where I'm coming from. Maybe also interesting to tell you that how it looks in my environment, and to give you an idea, I show you a picture of my original village where I'm originally coming from. It is called Glarus, and it is in a state in the middle of the Alps. You realize already there's a lot of mountains around. And the picture you're seeing is quite typical for the culture and certain values and regularities in Switzerland. You might be familiar with the fact that Switzerland, they practice direct democracy. And by direct democracy, you refer to the fact that if there is voting, if there is elections, you actually gather your citizens, your people, and they have to give their votes directly in the community, in a gathering which is public, where you really show who is participating in your democracy, in your voting. You can also see that there is a lot of mountains around, and maybe you have heard the saying that a lot of mountains and narrow spaces in a country like Switzerland, that gives them sometimes a bit a narrow mindset. A lot of people, they say Swiss, they can be quite stubborn and hard-headed. Obviously, this is a lie. I can assure you it's not true, but just to give you an idea where I'm coming from. Now, in the next 40 minutes, what I'm planning to show you is actually put together in three key messages. What I would like to talk about is, number one, the profession, the job of a football coach, of a football developer, or in general, the job in the business of football. Some particularities, some key elements which might be considered amongst each other, that you will be certainly able to travel the world. And secondly, the key message number two, which I want to share with you, will be the fact that if you move around the globe, you have to understand that you're moving into different cultures. That's why our session is actually called East Meeting West, and that you have to learn about certain values and the different mindsets of people. And last but not least, still, because you want to perform, you want to achieve success, in this special environment, in these special circumstances, you still need to have a plan how to achieve success, how to achieve your goals. So to give you a start here and to explain what it means traveling around the globe, I'll have highlighted my last two stations in my coaching career. You see at the bottom here of the slide, we have Singapore. That's where I've worked as the national coach of the senior football team. And obviously here, with your event taking place in Singapore and me having worked for 4 years with the Malaysian Football Association, that's somehow the main aspects of my last few travels. And just to let you know, if you take a job in New Zealand, that's actually more or less the furthest place to go away from your home country you can put on the whole globe, because whichever direction you approach this country, it will take you about 24, sometimes even 30 hours of traveling, and it's the furthest distance which can any of all the options and possibilities. But to give you also an idea about some of the other spots and places where I have been working as a football coach, as a football developer, as a consultant, I have highlighted a few spots on the world map. And to be honest, it's just a selection. There is more locations, but you see already, actually you get around the world. If you're in the football business, you might be traveling. And I have friends, colleagues in the professional game who told me and confessed, I want to see the world, I want to travel, that's why I went into the football business. And for you, you're actually approaching sooner or later the end of your studies, and if you really decide to travel the world, it could be an interesting option to stay in the football business, because you really will get around. This very obviously, however, comes with a few very particular regularities and aspects. And before you set out to pack your bag and get your luggage ready, I want to share a few elements which make the football job a bit unique. It's not to be compared with a job in another industry, because as you know, we are already talking here about a very volatile and fast-moving business. And to give you an idea about the life of a football coach, you might be very well familiar with the fact that football coaches usually don't last very long. This is a statistic of the English Premier League, explaining that the average time of a coach in his position hardly ever extends more than 1.5 years. And the last 2 years, for instance, that's from a report of the National Coaches Association in England, in the UK, it was 65 managers to leave the position. And you also have to understand that with all the coaches, it's usually at the end of the season, it's just one to win the trophy. And the win ratio of all the other coaches is maybe 30%, which means out of 3 games, you may every now and then win one. And regarding the volatility of the job, of the business, it's also interesting to observe that once you have had an opportunity to prove your quality, to be a coach in a top position, but you get the sack, whether it's after a year or less, you hardly ever get an opportunity to make a second job on the same level. 60% of all the managers who have been sacked in the Premier League over the last 2-3 years, they hardly ever get a job on the same level, unless your name is Mourinho, Guardiola, or Pochettino. But all the others who want to make a way in the business have to work very hard. Now, to give you an idea that this is not only the situation in the big leagues like France, Germany, or England, an example from Switzerland, where our top league, the first tier professional division in Switzerland, is now looking at 20 years since their introduction. And in these 20 years, consisting of 10 teams in the league, we have seen more than 200 coaches. So I would invite you to make the mathematics and see how many coaches we have already burned. And just to make sure that you are also comparing this to your environment. Singapore Premier League, 9 clubs. The last 2 full seasons, 2018 and 2020, they have seen 23 coaches, meaning it's a volatile, fast-changing business for coaches, even the best, even the big coaches. And I think you might be familiar with this face if you're a little bit into football. This is Sven-Göran Eriksson, who has been a national coach in Europe in many countries. He has worked in the best leagues in England, in the UK, in Italy. Over the last 5 to 10 years, he has been to other places all over the world, and the average number of games he would be in position doesn't extend than 10 games. And usually after 6 months, it was time for him to pack the bag and get to next position. And now to give you an idea that this is not only affecting football coaches, that goes for people in management in the football business as well, whether you're an administrator or a coordinator, or like in this situation here, what they call a technical director, where you're actually part of the management of an organization. And as I have been involved in the introduction of manuals and guidelines for technical directors all over the world, and introducing these regulations and these manuals to all the member associations throughout the world over the last 2 years, what we had to observe was that in 2 years, 50% of all these technical directors in position of member associations, they were changed, they were released, they were, fired, and new people coming in. So in short, it's volatile. It's not giving you certainty. It's certainly not always sustainable. and you will be always challenged to make the best out of it in very short time. But again, you will be able to travel and you will be able to see the world. Only thing what you have to accept is when you're traveling, it's maybe bringing your passport and one suitcase and not too much more. Forget your furniture, forget your family, forget your friends. It's not always possible to bring your environment, your relatives, or all the contacts you have. You will be very soon a lonely soul traveling around the globe. And it's a very particular situation because you're not only very often traveling as a single unit without families and friends, but you will always be in a new environment where you are the new one, where you are the stranger and you are the foreigner to prove yourself in a new environment. And this slide here actually shows you that in any place where you go, strangers, foreigners, expats, they have the challenge, they have the difficulty to find their place in a completely new, very often different environment. Just to give you an idea, every country in the world, not only your place, Malaysia, Switzerland, every language in the world has their own expressions for foreigner. You might even discover a few of your favorite words. And let's be honest, it's not always that these expressions are politically correct. We have some in our environment which are not always respectful. And you, as a new person coming in to your new environment, you have to be aware that you are the stranger, you are new, and it's you who has to find his way in his new environment. And by finding your way in a new environment, I think this is one of the most important messages you can take away with the quote of this coach, which the picture you see with whom you are maybe also familiar, Diego Simeone, head coach of Atletico Madrid in Spain, explaining that if you come to a new place, and here it's coming as a coach into a new club, but it's the same for a technical director coming into a federation or an association. If you come into a new football environment, the best thing, the most important thing, and at the same time, the most respectful thing is to try to understand your new environment as quickly as possible. So you have to ask questions. What's the story? What's the story behind it? What's the values in this society? How do they tick? Very often I refer to this quote. I tell them, look, yes, I have to see how they kick the ball. But before I discuss how they kick, I must understand how they tick. How is their mindset? What are their customs? And maybe, and that's my background in Europe, you are familiar with the name of Julius Caesar's quote, and the ancient Romans, they used to say, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Saying nothing else, but the one to adapt is you. The one to change his habits and mold into your new environment. That's you. Don't expect your environment to adapt to your habits and to your standards. And it's very obvious that exists in your environment as well, because that's the expression which actually explains the same as the Roman quote. Hu xiang sui shu, if I pronounce this correctly, might stand for the same. If you enter the village, follow customs of your new village. And that's exactly what you have to do when you come in. You can learn about new customs talking to people, studying your environment. You can also study literature, and you can get into reading books. And that's what I did when I came to Malaysia, for instance, to give you an idea. The first book I bought and I studied was actually about the history of Malaysian football. I don't know whether you are familiar with these novels. It's actually not always just statistics and facts and figures. Very often it's critical. It's sometimes satirical, but that doesn't stop you from learning about the background and the history of your environment. I also studied how to coach and how to behave in my new environment, for example. And I have different resources where I could actually learn about the values and the mindset of people in different environments. Just for your information, if you want to take notes, if you want to put down the ISBN numbers, if you want to go for further study and further information, these books are all available on the net. If you want to get and have these figures, please feel free to take notes or later to actually come back and get more information about this. I will use this book on East meets West from a Chinese designer, which came out in about 10 years ago, explaining in very simple and very comprehensive way where we might find some differences if we move from east to west. And I'll give you just a selection of a few of these aspects to showing you some difference. Very obviously, you will certainly not be, challenged by understanding which is which, blue and red. I don't ask you to guess which one is east, which one is west. If I came to Malaysia and I put let's say a coaching session on a certain time, I had to understand that it's not that time is money, time is life. And my challenge, obviously, as a coach was to explain to our players or to our staff and our colleagues, look, if you want to go to the World Cup, it's FIFA setting a kickoff time. And international kickoff times, they are following certain rules and regulations. And if you want to have the whole world sitting in front of a television, the game starts at 12 p.m. And they will certainly not wait for Malaysian national team to be ready at 12:15, for instance, just to give you an idea about where you start to actually encounter these challenges. Obviously, people from East and West, they have different ways to express their opinion. But when you come to Asia, you also have to understand that the way to express emotions is not the same as you're used to be. If you're angry, you show anger. If you're angry, maybe don't show anger, keep it for yourself. Which is which? How do you deal with people when you don't see behind the surface? Or how do you tackle difficult challenges, difficult problems? I can share with you the experience that when I actually approached a topic, a project, and I came up with the remark, sir, colleague, coach, Mr. General Secretary, Mr. President, we have a problem. His first response was not, what is it? His first reply was always, it's not a problem. It's not a problem. It's, let's call it a challenge and how to tackle it, because you see, there might be different ways to approach it. It's also the perception of me as a person, myself, yourself. How do I see myself in the Western environment? How is the Asian mindset if you compare these elements? And for instance, how do you see yourself in your environment, in your job, in your organization? What is the respect against hierarchy or status? And just this small selection of these elements show you that there are different ways to see certain values. Western individuality versus Asian sense for community. Equality versus hierarchy. Always winning, but keep it, modest and with humility. Show pride, try to save face. Respect results or respect status. Respect elders or respect competence. I can tell you a Western player very often would approach you and tell you, look, only because you have the tag head coach or it has boss written over your forefront, that doesn't mean that I follow you. Show me what you can, show me what you have to offer, and show me your competence. If you're competent, if you know what you're doing, we might get into business together. Selfishness versus the sense of sharing, control versus accepting. So there are a lot of aspects where you will understand that there are different approach, different mindset, and different ways of getting into life. And very obviously, this will also play into your job, into your business, whether you're a sports director, event organization in sports, or whether you're a head coach. Now, to show you a few examples, I'll give you one or two elements of these very particular elements which I encountered in my last two stations, in my last two positions in Malaysia and in New Zealand. Like Malaysia, that's something which you are very familiar with. Sitting in Singapore, you have already to face the fact that it's a very multicultural, multi-ethnic environment. You have a country of 30 million people, and out of these 30 millions, you have to pick Malay, Chinese Malay, Indian Malay, and maybe other, origin, to put a strong national team together, or a football team, or a strong football organization. So very obviously, you also have to understand that these ethnies, these groups of your society will follow certain different values and have very often different mindsets. The challenge to mold these into one team, into one working unit, into one successful working organization is already on the table, and you have to not only enjoy the multicultural, the diversity of your environment, but you also have to deal with it. You have to be aware that you are moving into a different culture in terms of religion, and this is not about a critical discussion on whether we favor any of the world religions or other philosophies. It's not about Christianity, Buddhism, or Islam. But if you're getting into an Islamic country, to give you a very simple example, you have to understand that the duty of the Muslim is to follow his duty to pray. And if I'm a coach, or if I'm a head of a working unit in a football association, to put my next meeting or to put my next practical session on the pitch in the afternoon around 4, you will soon realize that this is the time of the fourth prayer of the day. So if you see players walking off the pitch first time, you will not understand what's happening before you get into your study of what happens, what are the key elements and the daily procedures of your players, to respect their environment, their values, and to maybe shift your training session to another time of the day, to allow them to follow their practice, to have their prayers, and then being completely focused on your session on the pitch. Let's take another example, talking about Ramadan. you might be aware that very often in the sporting season, football events, large events like World Cups, like tournaments, like Olympic tournaments, they come in the middle of the year. And every now and then, these big events, there is a date collision with Ramadan, for instance, which means you're working with athletes who are actually compliant and expected to do fasting for almost a full month. And that's a challenge which you have to understand. You cannot just brush it away. You have to work with it. You have to adapt, and you have to find a way to really take the best out of this and to organize your project around these values and these customs. We have already spoken about the concept of face. And the concept of face, as you know it, is not only referring to the fact that you don't always show your emotions, it's also about the fact that you don't want to lose your face in your environment. So you imagine a senior star player in your team and the head coach addressing him with a critical remark in front of the whole group, in front of youth players, in front of the public, might maybe not be your best approach if you consider these elements, that this is a very, very strong element in the Asian culture. But to be honest, I can also assure you that's the same you have to respect in our environment. If you have a Western, group, a Western environment, it's the same. You wouldn't, brush down Lionel Messi in front of your youth players. That's connected to your respect and your human values as a coach. But obviously, you're familiar with this. The concept of face is very strong. And I have to also to mention this. Unfortunately, this is still a fact and a concern for everybody involved in the game. We all know about the challenges of match fixing. And if you come in from a Western environment and you realize there is bigger issues in this area, you might find yourself a bit, shocked. However, if you understand, number one, that Asian people, they have a big affinity, they have a big passion for gaming, for betting. You also understand that there is obviously a platform where money is moved around. You want to win money in your betting activities, the money has to go somewhere. And at the same time, you might understand that if players don't get professional contracts, don't get professional pay, the temptation to look for other resources or to accept certain extra income is a bit bigger than if you have a professional structure and everybody, including the coach, including the referee, including your players, they get decent salaries and professional contracts. Just a small example to show you can't only condemn the match fixing, you have to understand where it's coming from, and you have to understand to work around it and actually find solutions to minimize the risk of getting into these problem situations. Let's say so much for Malaysia, for my experience in Southeast Asia, and maybe take a step and look at the next job, which took me again to the other end of the world, New Zealand, where they obviously have maybe less challenges and less problems concerned with match fixing and betting. But on the other hand, it's another challenge to be in a country, to come to a country where not only football is not number one sport in the country, and where not, everybody is actually focusing on football and getting football to the front of everything. First of all, it's less population. You might have heard the expression that New Zealand, they have more sheep than human people, 4.5 million. That's almost, let's say 15% of the Malaysian population, which we had just a few minutes ago. And the best players are not playing on this island, because you have seen how remote the whole country is from the rest of the world. And you will see in a minute that if the best players really want to compete on top level, they have to go abroad, because there is no competition in this environment. And last but not least, that's an interesting fact which you might not be familiar with. Being part of the Oceania Confederation, there is only a 50% half ticket access to a World Cup final tournament, because usually until at least the next tournament of FIFA World Cup in 2022 in Qatar, it was always be, the rule, the regulation that the winner out of the Oceania qualification campaign would always have to challenge one last qualified team of either AFC, which is Asian Confederation, CONCACAF, or CONMEBOL, which are the Central American or the South American Confederation. So before you win against these rivals, which obviously is very often a superior competition for you, before you celebrate your qualification in Oceania, you have to go and fight against and challenge these teams in playouts. Meaning maybe explaining why this sport is much more common, much more, in the passion of the country. I think you might be even familiar with the team of the so-called All Blacks, the New Zealand rugby team, which is actually to be considered one of the best teams, sport teams and sport organizations. I might even say sport brands in the whole world. A global business, a global organization, a very strong, powerful brand. And this is already the first challenge when you get to New Zealand and want to promote football, because even the kids, before they think football, very often they think about rugby and they want to get into this game. Another very challenging element is that you have to work around low competition. There is not too much competition in your neighborhood, to be honest, without disrespecting, countries and football teams from Fiji, from Tahiti, from New Caledonia, from the Solomon Islands, from Papua New Guinea. That's not the challenge you will find on the world stage. So if you come in this situation, if you come out of a game against Fiji with a score of 10-0, that doesn't take you directly to the final stage of a World Cup tournament. And very often, if you can't get into international competition to have regular, challenging international games, it is very difficult for these sports to close the gap and actually to connect with best practice. Just to give you an idea about the next challenge, because I told you already, the players of the international teams, the national team players, they are spread all over the world, because if you want to compete, if you want to have not only a competitive environment, but also professional football, professional pay, and professional training, you have to move out of the country as early as possible, which means as a national team coach sitting in New Zealand, it is very likely that you don't see your players over the length of a year. I can give you from my experience the example of my first year, where I actually was able to play not more than 4 international games. and 3 of them taking place in the month of June. Which means some of these faces I wouldn't have, seen them live in person for more than a year, unless you're able to travel and visit these players in their respective clubs, which means you have to travel to South Africa, you have to travel to North America, you have to travel obviously also to Europe. So you're passing quite some time in the airplane just to make contact and have a personal chat with your players. Last but not least, I want to introduce or share the element of what they call tall poppy syndrome, which actually refers to the mindset or the technical expression of putting people down if they stand out of the average crowd. Originally, it comes out of the history where everybody who was actually excelling, being able to produce or to achieve or to perform in a extraordinary way, they were cut down and reminded of modesty and humility. Very obviously, that's nice for everybody, but if you cut down the candle of your opponent or your neighbor, that doesn't mean that your own light is shining brighter or stronger, and it also prevents personality to strive for goals, to keep high ambitious goals, and to work for it, because if you are proving to be something special, maybe your environment wouldn't like to see that, and they want to cut you down and bring you down to average. So with this, you see, it's, of course, yes, it's nice if you're in the football business and you will be able to travel the world if you are ready, number one, to accept the regularities, the volatile nature of your business, and if you are ready to learn and understand about your respective environment, to understand the culture of your place where you're working, and again, very important, if you are prepared to adapt and to work with the mindset and the qualities you find in your new place. Still, you need to have a plan, because you want to achieve and you want to build successful projects. And in order to achieve this, you will follow the same principles and the same guidelines which you actually might be now just studying in your institute, because as I understand, you're all working around sport management. And if you want to achieve long-term success, if you want to establish a project with sustainable guidelines and strategic planning, that's where you have to go through. You have to go through strategic planning cycles. You have to evaluate not only your environment, you have to evaluate your resources. You have to try to evaluate the situation you're in. What are the qualities you have? What are the players, offering in terms of qualities? What are the characteristics of your organization? What's the identity of your brand? Or let's make it, with a very common term, what's the football DNA in your environment? What can be the key objectives of your project? How will you organize your environment to really achieve certain goals? I'm pretty sure you're familiar with the term of the SMART goals, meaning specific goals related to your job, to your task, measurable goals where you can really move forward and compare your achievement against certain benchmarks. Of course, also achievable. Don't tell me you want to go to the World Cup next week. it has to be realistic, and it has to be timed. That's about the smart goal setting, and you have to control and monitor your advantage. And if you look at the same time how you organize your closer environment as a coach, this will be your team, your squad. As a technical director, this might be your technical department. As a general secretary of a federation, this might be the whole staff, the whole structure of all your human resources. There are certain areas where you have to look for team chemistry. Again, this is about values. This is about the mindset. This is about the culture in your new environment, in your new group. You have to see, football-wise, we're talking players here, what's the demographic structure, and you have to check performance. And if you follow these processes and you identify certain key elements, you might establish a team culture where you can strive for certain progress. Let me give you a very brief insight into one or two steps how I try to really put the All Whites, which is the nickname for the New Zealand national team, into these projects, into strategic planning, into squad management, and most of all, and most importantly, how to actually convince the team members, the players, the staff to buy into these projects and to buy into these goals. How did we do this? Very simple first approach. I asked them, you want to go to the World Cup, you don't qualify for the World Cup. Actually, it's not like Malaysia, which we saw in the previous slide, that they never made it to the World Cup, but it's been more than 10 years they've never been to the World Cup. Being a small country, like say, looking at only 4 million of a population and maybe 200,000 or 300,000 registered players, the fact was that this was not able to be, brought up as an excuse, because I showed them, I compared them to the 6 nations here on the slide: Panama, Uruguay, Iceland, Croatia, Costa Rica, Denmark. Small countries, not more than 4 or 5, millions of inhabitants, and very often maybe hardly 1 million or 500,000 of registered players. And as you might recall, all of these countries, they made it to the last World Cup tournament in Russia. So I had to ask my team, my players, what are the key elements which you have to look for if we want to look for improvement, if you want to compete with these countries who made it to the World Cup? What do we need to do to maybe also make World Cup history, even if you're a small country? Some very technical minor elements for you as football interested students. Of course, first of all, you're interested in how you score, how many goals you score, how many goals you concede. And if you look at the statistics from New Zealand when I took the team, if you're scoring, let's say, half a goal average and you concede 3 times more in a game, it is difficult to win matches. And if you see that the conversion rate, which actually shows you how many scoring opportunities in a game you need in order to score 1 goal, it is more or less 1 out of 12, 8%. So if you have a game where you need to set up 12 scoring opportunities to be able to score, it's challenging. This here, and this is the question, if you want to score goals, you need to have possession of the ball. And if you don't have it, you have to recover, you have to win the ball. This here shows you not only the area where the ball usually is recovered when you score goals, it also shows you every number here which stands for a goal. So the ball has been recovered in the midst of the park, here up front in your opponent's third. And also you understand this is world football, this is not New Zealand football. With all the goals you observe being scored in international football, more than 80% are scored in the box, which means you have to be in the box to score goals. You have to be close to the goal when you win the ball to make it short way, short time to the opponent's goal. And now, and this is the first slide which I show you from New Zealand statistics, just to give you an idea how difficult the first approach was. This here is where most of the ball was recovered in New Zealand international games, meaning 4 out of 5 times they win the ball in their own defensive third. And now here's a very interesting statistic connecting with this. This 53% explain the passing rate, or if you want, the unforced or maybe missed errors. 50% of a passing rate, successful passes, means basically every second pass you play in the game doesn't find your teammate, goes to the opponent. Now here you do your exercise. You recover the ball in your own defense, and you only have a guarantee that every now and then you can put together a sequence of 2 or more passes successfully. My question is, how do you get into the opponent's box to score a goal? Because it's a long way from the final third to the opponent third. So this was for our team, first to study some of our performance indicators and then put it in comparison with the teams which I mentioned before: Costa Rica, Iceland, Norway, Croatia. And to make it easier to understand, of course, we skipped all the figures because it's too much to show the players' figures, but it was very helpful to show them a graph where they were in direct comparison with these other small nations which made it all to the World Cup. What you see here is a table with some of the most, let's say, important key performance indicators, if you want. Points per game, shots per goal, and we put all these KPIs in comparison with all the other teams. And if you look at the line here on top, what you would have on the left side is the 0 performance, and on the right side you have the 100% performance. And it might not be, a complete surprise for you that teams like Germany, they represent very often, they stand for best practice. Even England very often stand for best practice. But in here, in the middle of the park, you see a lot of flags of Costa Rica, Croatia, Norway, and not New Zealand. So when I first met the players of our national team, I showed them, look, that's where we stand if we compare to the teams which made it to the World Cup. Now we have to start moving, because if you want to go to the World Cup, sooner or later, we have to improve. Not all of these aspects. We'll not be able to change this within a week or 2, but we have to make sure that we understand where we are. We have to accept our current position, and we have to use our resources. We don't have Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi or Benzema. So we have to use with the qualities we have available with our players, and we have to do what is possible. We can't expect to play Germany and Spain every 2 weeks because the remoteness of our situation, but we have to start. And now, and this is maybe the most important step which you see here, what you can do as a coach, you can throw all these facts and figures and statistics at your players, and you give them directions, and you tell them, look, from now on, I'm the boss. I'm telling you that's our KPI, which we want to achieve. But what you can also do, you can involve your players in the process of setting these smart goals. You can actually ask them, go back, discuss, where do we start? We have 10, 15 elements where we have to improve. We will not be able to change this. We have 1 or 2 training camps. We don't have too many games at hand every year. So what we did in cooperation with the players, in workshops, in group discussions, go and set your individual goals, set your team goals, and come back to me and let me see where we really want to start. And that's just one slide, one flip chart paper out of one of these team sessions where the players came back and told me, if you see like here, the average, which we want to improve our rate of conceded goals, not more than 1 goal per game. Or we want to have more recoveries in the opponent's half, so we have a closer, connection to the opponent's goal. If we have 2 passes, we will not improve this in 2 days. But this is actually involving the players in finding smart goals. It's actually giving them the responsibility for the goal setting and more or less providing them with ownership. If they have the responsibility to follow the guidelines and the KPIs which they have established, it's more of a motivation. They are more inspired to actually work in the process, much rather than just being instructed to work along some guidelines. So in short, to come to a very brief conclusion, I told you I have 3 key messages, take-home messages for you in these 45 minutes, which we have covered now. If you want to travel the world, you can easily choose a job, some activity in the football business. It's a very attractive, interesting area to work in, and you can actually travel around the whole globe. It will take you everywhere. You have to be aware of some very particular regularities of this business. It's volatile, it's very fast changing, and it's not always easy to follow long-term plans or goals, because the next game, the next win, or the next defeat might already decide on your destiny. But it's very attractive, and you will always be, on the road, and you will be able to learn a lot about the world and the cultures. Number 2, you have to accept that you will be working in different cultures, in different environments, and that you will be working with people with different mindsets, with different, values, and you will be, observing that you have to adapt to your environment. It's not the environment that has to adapt. You have to adapt and work with the mindset and the values you're living in. And last but not least, nevertheless, the fact that it is a short-term environment, volatile, you might be leaving a position after 1 year, 20 games, and nevertheless, even if you have to work with new mindset, with new philosophy, you need to have a plan, you need to have a strategic approach, and you need to approach your team, your cooperators, your staff, or your organization with these guidelines and with these strategic elements to make them buy into your project and to take responsibility and take ownership in the project and take responsibility to achieve your goals, even with your philosophy, your very particular mindset. So with this, I would like to conclude my short presentation and see whether Aysha has already gathered certain questions for the Q&A. Thank you very much for your attention and listening. Now I would be very curious to hear about your questions and your opinions and your view on the facts and figures around football in various cultures. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fritz. That was a very insightful sharing from you. So before I open the floor for your questions, you can just let you to know that you can use the raise hand function on Zoom here and mention your name before you ask your question. And you can also use the chat function. Also, remember that at the end of this, we have a group photo. So it would be great if you can turn on your camera at the end of the event. So, Fritz, I have one question for you. So in your career, obviously you have faced, you have had successes, and also you have faced obstacles. So what kind of you've mentioned that as a coach, that career is can change quickly, and it is also a short lifespan as a coach, right? I mean, yeah, it can change anytime. So what kind of mentality or mindset that a coach needs to have to overcome failures in their careers, in your opinion?
Well, I think first of all, Aysha, I think he has to really accept these very particular regularities of this business. I mean, if we are in sport, we know there is always success and failure. And the more you play games, the more, possible it is that you might lose every now and then. I usually say every now and then the ball hits the post, which means one shot missing can decide on your destiny as a coach. And you have to accept this, and you have to be ready to accept these elements and these aspects, which makes it, of course, very, difficult, because there is pressure, there is always high expectations. And at the same time, you need to have your plan and you need to have your approach to understand that even if you have a good plan, if you have a strategy, and if you have certain principles which you are actually following to put your project in practice, that it's not always depending on you, on your work. There is certain aspects in the environment. And to be honest, in every football league, in every competition, there is usually one winner. And this is, of course, one of the basic rules in sports competition. You know that saying, the winner takes it all. And the second place, the third place, they get out of it empty-handed. And very often, of course, it's also the expectations of your environment, because your fans, your management maybe, and you as a representative from the media, you might know this very well. Even the media, they want to see trophies, they want to see winners, and that's something which we have to accept.
Thank you, Fritz. Okay, let's see if anyone has any questions yet. Okay, there's a question from one Amiro. He's asking, what is the difference in football culture in Singapore compared to Switzerland? That's an interesting one. Fritz?
Well, again, as you are aware of the fact that Singapore is world ranking somewhere 140, 150, and Switzerland is a very competitive environment, being placed in the world ranking amongst the top 10. You understand, you see the world map. Switzerland is in the heart of Europe. You are actually surrounded by top football nations. Germany in the north, France, the world champion, in the west, Italy in the south of Switzerland. Spain is very near. England is very near. So with Switzerland being a very small country, the resources, even the economic resources, the resources in terms of numbers of talents, players pools are very limited. And in order to take the best out of this limited number of talents, there needs to be a very high quality of development, high quality of coaching to really make sure that you don't lose a single talent. If you compare the population of Switzerland with 7 to 8 million, and you compare it with Germany, 50 and more million, Spain, France, you cannot afford to miss out one single talent. So you have to make sure that you have a very good talent identification system. You have a very good basic education from youth throughout, the various stages of the player's pathway. And you need to have excellent coaching opportunities to really make the best out of it. And at the end of the day, it's also a question of mindset of the players. If you want to make it to the top, you have to be prepared to leave the country and accept competition in the top leagues in Europe. A lot of players from Switzerland also, they play in the Bundesliga, they play in England, some play in Spain, Italy. And if you are actually prepared to accept this challenge and you have an opportunity to play the best of the best every week in, week out, that's where you can raise the standard and the quality of your football overall. And now I would ask you, either Amirul or you, Aysha, how many Singapore players are playing outside of your country, are prepared to leave their home ground and face the challenge, let's say in the Japanese J-League, in the Thai League, that's not too far from Singapore. From my experience back in Malaysia, I would not remember too many players of the top players, national team players, playing in a foreign league, whether it's Thailand or, let's say, Japan, the J League, to pick one or two of the top leagues in your environment. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, I can say about Malaysia right now. We have maybe 2 players playing, but in Thailand at the moment. But we have a young player playing in Belgium now, but we don't know yet if he's going to make it to the first team, right? But in Singapore, I believe that players in Singapore have more courage than Malaysian players to play outside of the country. Yeah, that's my opinion. Okay, I have another question from Jian Ming. Let's say if your team lost a game and feel demoralized, as a coach, how do you motivate and bring them back on track again?
I think a very interesting, actually that's a good question. Thank you very much. And a very interesting tool to support this is to put the focus on also a mid and long-term development of your key performance indicators. And that's why I put so much weight on working these aspects with the players. If you don't have detailed plans, if you don't have detailed mid and long-term goals, even for your team, let's say we want to improve the number of successful passes in a game, we want to improve the average number of conceded goals, we want to improve the number of recovery in your opponent's half, you're always down only on measuring the result. And if you have a result which is unfortunately negative because your shot hits the post, like I mentioned, and the other shot from the opponent's striker was deflected and goes in, you lose 1-0. And this might already help to demoralize your team. But if you are able to show them, look, we lost 1-0, but look at our figures. You have improved in terms of passing. Your passing quality is getting better. You're getting more recoveries in opponent's half. You have more shots at goal. You have, and I can give you an example with New Zealand, like, because you saw the figures on the slide. We lost a game where we had conceded only a third of all the shots at our goal inside our own box. So actually we had an improvement of more than 30%, but unfortunately one of these shots hit the target and we lose. And I have to be able to show the players, yes, we lost the game, but on our process to improve some of these key performance elements, we are on a good way. Let's keep working. Let's believe in what you put up as your goals. And next time when the ball hits the post in our box and we have shots deflected, it might already be a better result. And if I may say that, by the way, if you are communicating these goals, these key performance indicators with your management, with your president, with the board, it might also help you to last longer in your position, because they would not only listen to the media or the fans after 2 games lost, they will show their, key performance indicators and say, look, they haven't made too many wins, but there is improvement, and let's put faith and believe in the cooperation of this group. Which is a difficult one, obviously, because you know how it is.
Okay, Fritz. Another one, I think this is very interesting from Ling Yi. So you have coached in many countries, right? Do you get homesick when you are in other country, or are you already used to that?
I think you never get used to, homesickness. That's, like I mentioned, especially if you have to travel on your own. I showed you this in the beginning of the presentation. When I came to Malaysia, I came on my own. I left my family back. They would later be able to join me, but the first year I was on my own. And I still remember the very first day when I, come from at the airport, immigration officer, and I'm standing in front of the immigration officer and I have to wait. And I think, hey, I've never been here before. I'm all alone and I don't know how long I will stay here. How will it be? And, if you have a choice, you're tempted to walk away and go back to your next airplane and fly home. But once you get into it, I think the more you work and the more involved you are, the more you can actually, get used to environment. But homesick, you never lose it. And very often you get the most homesickness you get when you lose a game and you have to face the critics.
Okay, Fritz. Okay, one more maybe this is something that you can share if coaching is not a choice. So, if you were not a coach, this is a question from Amira. If you were not a coach, what would you be? What do you think would you be?
I would have another function as a developer, football developer, as a football teacher, as a football consultant. To make it very simple, when you start, the best job in football is to be a player, and the second best is to be a coach. But as you see, the industry around this game is getting bigger and bigger, and it's a global industry. And the more it grows, the more opportunities come up where you can be involved, even if you're not a football coach. To give you an example, before I was a professional coach, I worked as a amateur coach, but at the same time, Aysha, that's for you. For 5 years, I was a sports journalist, covering football as a journalist. And even before that, I was working for a big bank, which is might become as a surprise for you, because I don't look like a bank manager to you, maybe. But I was fortunate and lucky enough to find a niche where I could work in sports sponsoring. With my experience as a journalist, I could also work on media and PR aspects, and I would cover all the sport sponsoring projects of this big national bank, which actually was CS, Credit Suisse at that time. So you see, your affinity is not only to coaching, your affinity and your passion is for the sport or for the game. And if you come out with a background, and you, all the students here, they will have a background in event management, in sports management, in marketing. Of course, the next opportunity will come up. And now, the last 2 years, I wasn't working as a coach, so I was working as a teacher, as a consultant for UEFA, for FIFA, or in working in situations like here, the Singer Cup, as a guest speaker.
Thank you so much, Fritz, and thank you so much everyone for your questions.